refresher if it's been a few days since they got the last email from you. Another thing, setting it up as a thread style campaign, this really allows you to create a campaign, and Josh will get into this a bit more when he talks about conversational tone, where you're kind of building a story with the emails that you're sending. So maybe in that first step email, you put a quick introduction of yourself. Step 2, you can build upon what you initially said in that first step email. So you don't have to say, hey, I'm repeating all the information I already sent you a couple days ago. They could just scroll down and get that additional information. It also makes it easier for you to use phrases such as you can see right here, just one to circle back and provide a bit more detail. I've actually seen campaigns where it's all separate emails going out, and then someone says, one to circle back. I've actually seen responses say, what email are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So that's something that you don't want to happen. So as you can see right here, the way that this campaign is set up is step 3 and step 2 are threaded together with step 1. And that what we've done here is step 4 is created a new thread. So what we've done is given step 4 subject line. So now step 5 is going to be threaded with step 4. And step 5 is going to have the same subject line as step 4, but it's going to have an RE : soft reset. So it looks to your prospect like you went into your Gmail account, found the email that you sent them 3 days ago, and hit reply, and are just adding to that email that you previously sent.
Exactly.
And then also what you can see here, step 1, day 1, step 2, day 3, step 3, day 7. The nice thing about the platform is that the default delays in days, and again, this is all dependent on your scheduling piece, which we talked about in our last session. These are the default settings are optimal delays. So for example, step 1, day 1, step 2, day 3, step 3, day 7. So your emails are essentially going out 3 to 4 days apart at the beginning of the sequence. And then for your later steps, you're kind of spreading them out so that your campaign essentially lasts for about a month. And again, these defaults have been set based on best practices that us and our team have seen across multiple customer accounts, actually probably thousands of customer accounts, if I want to be a bit more specific. So like I said, be a bit more persistent in the first 3 steps and then spread it out a bit longer in the last steps of the campaign.
Yeah, just to kind of answer Bill's question, Stefanie, you largely were already answering it. But essentially what I like to do personally is your first 3 messages are usually going to have the most kind of intensive information and value. I like those to go out with the least amount of time between them. You want to build on the momentum of starting this relationship, which is why we have the first 3 going out in the first week and a half or so. The numbers can be tweaked slightly, but I wouldn't make it like day 1, day 7 for your first 2 steps, because there's just letting too much time lapse between your initial touch point. And these people are strangers to you. They have no idea who you are. So there's no reason for them to essentially keep you top of mind. And having a full week go by without any sort of without poking them will more often than not lead them to completely forgetting about you. So having your first 3 or 4 go out within a closer proximity is better for you. And then after that kind of initial drip, you want to give them a little bit of time to digest. And then the further along in your campaign you go, the more time you want between the messages, because kind of upsetting people and annoying them is a thing. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. A week to 2 weeks plus, depending on how often you're reaching out, is better the deeper into your sequence you go.
Yeah. And, a lot of the feedback I get from customers, or a lot of the reaction I get from customers when I say to them, optimal 4 to 6 steps, their immediate response is, oh, is that not too much? Is that going to scare off the people that I'm emailing? There is some persistence there, but at the same time, if you are spreading your emails out with a big enough delay, it's not going to come across as annoying to your prospects. I definitely wouldn't recommend, the first 3 steps of the campaign, doing them 1 day apart, because that might seem a bit too persistent. So just a little bit of delay. And then, like we said before, spread out the last steps of the campaign so that whether it's 4 steps, 5 steps, or 6, they're still getting that content, but without feeling like they're being bombarded with emails from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, Stefanie, was there anything else that you wanted to cover for basic content structure?
No, I think you can head on into subject lines. There's also a question from Yusuf that we could probably get to after you go through your subject lines.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the first step here. So yeah, I'll be kind of taking point on specifics about what you want to include in your messaging. And to Yusef's point, the idea of threading emails together versus having them all go out independently. While we don't have any hard numbers to throw at you, it is very use case dependent. If your entire goal is to just spread information about your product or service, if you're not truly looking for responses, having an independent subject line can be used to your advantage, newsletter style type of content. You want to kind of lean into the more graphical kind of intense styles for that purpose, simply because you're not trying to get engagement. You're just trying to grab their attention visually and have them kind of interact with maybe links that you have available. Usually for cold outreach, this style does not work as well because these types of messages are permeated all over the place, especially for when you purchase something from an online retailer. If you order food, you're going to get bombarded with newsletters like that. And the deliverability on those is usually always going to land in your supplementary folders, things like your promotions or updates. If you don't mind landing in those same places, by all means, go for it. If your true goal is to get people to actually respond to you and to drive conversations, you want to stay away from that kind of thing. Um, the other point to keeping things threaded together is, again, you are reaching out to essentially strangers at this point. If you were on the receiving end, would you rather have one kind of clean, cohesive thread where everything that you are speaking about is in one location, or would you rather have it kind of sporadic throughout your entire inbox and put the onus on the recipient to then go find the information that you're speaking to, or give it to them in one kind of easy to digest package? We tend to forget that we receive cold emails all the time, but we don't typically think about how often we actually respond to and engage with the type of emails we're getting. So you want to move away from that style and move into that more conversational, casual space to differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack and really get those engagements going.
Yeah.
So,
and Josh, just to your point about kind of having everything almost in like one cohesive package, and like threading together those emails, what I like to think about is, really just how am I going to make it easier for my prospect to get all the information that I'm sending? And the thing is, I'm sure we all get so many emails a day, whether it's cold emails, emails from clients, prospective clients, our inboxes are full. So just making it easier for a prospect to have everything in one spot is definitely going to increase the return on the emails that you're sending and the campaigns that you're sending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Scott, I will message your point, answer your point in a moment. But it's a kind of little bit of both. To just kind of get back on task here, for subject lines, you can go a couple of ways. Having a generic message. So for example, if I just remove the first name, if I just have something like PPE on demand or quick question, that is a very kind of vague generalization, and it is clearly going out to a number of different people. Again, if your goal is to just spread that information, this is fine. It's letting them know exactly what to expect. If they're interested, they will click on it. If they're not, they'll leave it alone. Quick question is the most kind of commonly used example of a subject line in this space. It works, but because it's so prevalent in the cold email industry at this time, I would recommend moving away from that. It's a clear tell that this is going out to multiple people, and you want to make it seem as unique and personal as possible. That's where the first name or company name at the minimum comes into effect. You are now moving away from the general statement and addressing this message directly to the individual on the receiving end. The example I like to use is if you go to your actual mailbox in real life and you have a bunch of things that say to homeowner, and then one thing that's addressed to you specifically, you're more likely to open the one that's addressed to your name as opposed to all the random stuff that's to homeowner, simply because it's probably more real. It's not just ads or general bills or something like that. general rule of thumb, in addition to that, is you want to keep it as short and sweet as possible. If you go over the recommended 2 to 6 range, depending on the email provider that other people are using that they're receiving from, it usually gets cut off at around the 5 to 6 word mark. And that could include very vital information that you need to have them open your messages. So the more long-winded you go, the less likely they're actually going to get the content or the context of your message, and they're more than likely going to ignore it.
And one of the things that I like to think about is that a lot of people are opening their emails on a mobile device,
exactly.
a phone, a tablet. So keeping that in mind, like Josh said, you don't want your subject line to be really long and then get cut off, so they actually don't see the context of the email. That might make them less likely to open it.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about spacing, and depending on the type of technology that people are using, it can hinder what they actually see. So you do want to take that into account. The last thing for subject lines will be, you don't need to speak in full sentence format. I've run into examples where people will literally type in the full sentence, like in full sentence structure of what they're trying to get out of this message. You don't need to be formal. As long as the core idea or concept is contained within your subject line, they know what you're talking about. That's usually enough to get them interested, as long as your list is targeted enough and the people you're reaching out to actually need what you're selling.
Yeah. And can I just hop in really quickly just about subject lines, and to your point, Josh? Like Josh mentioned, making sure that the subject line that you have in your campaigns is reflective of the content that's in your email is very important. So not only does it make sure, you need to ensure that you are compliant with, CAN-SPAM, for example, which does mention this in that legislation. But I saw a customer once, and this is a great example. What he did with his subject line is he worded it in a way where it implied that he had already spoken to them or he had already sent emails to them, which he had not. This was an initial cold campaign. What had happened was this actually angered a lot of the recipients because they felt like it wasn't genuine or truthful. So, things like that can affect your outreach and how your prospects are going to react to the emails that you're sending.
Yeah, absolutely. Genuity is a key. Before we continue, the other thing that you want to keep in mind is you can have the most beautifully written template in the world. I don't mean to belittle the importance of copy. It is extremely crucial that you do have copy that is well crafted and thought through. But more important than that is, if you're reaching out to just anybody and everybody, that doesn't necessarily actually have an interest in your core product or service, it doesn't matter what you've written. Your rates are going to be inherently low because you're not reaching out to people that need or want your stuff. So before you kind of dive into what to write, you should be thinking about who you're reaching out to and clearly state your goals for the campaign before you dive in. If you have a clear idea of what you want to happen, you can take the steps necessary to get to that end result. If you're just hoping for the best and getting a random list of 5,000 people, you're going to have inherently low results than someone who's only reaching out to 10 people, but they know those 10 people actually want the thing that you're talking about. So that is the number one thing to keep in mind before doing any of this.
Yeah, Josh, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah,
I was going to say,
it's something that a lot of people kind of gloss over, and they kind of put the onus entirely on content. But again, if no one's opening it, or they're just not in the market for, using this example, PPE, personal protective equipment, it doesn't matter what I've written. They just don't need it. So take the time and put the effort into finding a good curated list. And that in itself is going to get you a long way to your end goals.
Definitely. And, we refer to it as like the whole idea that you're going to take 5,000 people and put them in one campaign that's very generic. We call it spray and pray. So you're just adding all these people into your campaign and just kind of crossing your fingers, hoping that it resonates with someone in that list of 5,000 people. And what I like to say is, take your lead list, even if it's 5,000 people, and segment those leads. And maybe you break them down into maybe their position at the company, what it is they do, because a subject line that is worded towards a marketing manager is not going to resonate with someone who works in HR. They're probably just going to delete that email before they even open it. So, it does take a bit more time going into the campaign. You're segmenting your list. And like Josh said, write out or kind of think about, brainstorm the goals that you want to have for that specific group of people, and create very tailored campaigns with tailored subject lines that are going to appeal to that subset of people. So it does take a bit longer. You can't just kind of go in, create a campaign in 5 minutes and hit go. There is a bit more work that goes into it, but it will definitely pay off in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Again, lots of little tangents here, but it all kind of coalesces to give you the best end results. So we do like to kind of hit on all angles as possible. To answer another question that we have here, is it possible to A/B test specifically subject lines and not the whole template? Currently, we only have the one A/B system. If you hit add variant, it will ask you to create a full template, but your copy can be exactly the same thing as it was in the previous version, and you can just change the subject lines. You are not forced to make sweeping changes across the board. And then if you go to the stats tab once emails have actually been sent out, nothing will actually appear here because nothing's going on. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there will be a full breakdown of each of the individual steps and a toggle to see specifically how your A/B variants are performing with open rate, which will directly correlate to your subject lines. So in a roundabout way, the answer is yes, you can A/B test specifically for subjects. To go into Scott's question, let me just pull that up again.
I have it right here for me, Josh. Does using a thread increase the spam weight? That is, wouldn't the third email include the other spam elements first and second?
So how that works, and he's referring to using external elements like high HTML editing, images, hyperlinks, tracking.
Links. Yep.
Yeah, all of anything that's essentially not plain text will have a very slight impact on your deliverability score. With threading, if your first step email lands in the primary inbox folder of your recipients, the follow-ups in the same thread will land in the same place because they are threaded together. So it's very dependent on your step one. If you're doing it all independently, it has a higher chance for that one message, that particular step, to land in spam if it contains those other sort of elements, if you haven't included it in your original step. If you have a completely clean step one, just plain text, no real external factors, there's a pretty high chance that this is going to land in their main inbox. And then that automatically kind of assumes that your step 2 and 3, however many are in the thread, will also land in that same spot. It's not going to, your email provider is not going to move a message already in your inbox into spam if it's already in your primary inbox. It's kind of been green flagged, and it's good to go from that point forward. So short answer is threading is safer. For the actual content of your first email, you really want to keep this as kind of short and sweet as possible, very much like your subject lines. This is you knocking on the door of a stranger's home and hoping that they let you in. Your goal here is to not have them slam that door back in your face. Ideally, they would invite you in, but as long as you can continue that conversation, they haven't shut that door on you, you are allowed to have those follow-ups continue. And it's much easier to segue if you've broken the ice into a sale than just immediately jumping straight for that sales pitch. To that end, you want to have a context opener. You don't want to just say, hey, do you want to hop on a call? I sell this, this, and this. That's a little bit jarring. It's a little bit off-putting. That's not how you would start an actual conversation. So simply saying something like I have here, hey, Josh here from reply.io. I saw you on LinkedIn and thought that we would be a great match. And then from there, you can segue much more naturally into your sales pitch. It sounds a lot more conversational this way. I've attributed a name. I am a person now, and I've given them a reason as to why I'm reaching out. If you want to go even a step further, you can maybe drop a voicemail before the email, or even hit them on LinkedIn to add more legitimacy and realism to the message. And it just increases the likelihood that they will view you as a genuine human being, as opposed to this being an automated message going out to hundreds, if not thousands of other people. So it's all about that context opener. And this is probably the most crucial include in your step one that I would recommend. Introduce yourself, provide context. Then you want to kind of dive into just general information about your company. You want to keep it, again, short and sweet. You don't have to give them the entire history because, frankly, they probably don't care. They either want to know immediately what you do and why you're messaging them. And then if that has any relevance, they will then determine whether or not to continue on with this discussion. So very brief information about exactly what it is that you're trying to do. And then maybe you want to bring up potential pain points. You have all made sales before. You have all brought on clients. You know what your solution is good for. So bringing up questions surrounding a particular area that you have expertise in will start them thinking about ways that they need to improve. And then you're setting yourself up as the answer to that problem in steps 2 and 3. So a lot of people will lean on the kind of, hey, are you interested in a phone call later this week? Let me know, and kind of leave it at that as their call to action. Instead, you want to ask questions that invite conversation. If they don't want to hop on a phone call with you, they don't need to respond. They can just leave it alone and go about their day. Asking them more specific questions invites that dialogue, and that's what leads into the sale.
Yeah. And Josh, can I hop in here for a second?
Yeah.
You had mentioned kind of looking at it as though, you're knocking on a stranger's door and kind of getting them to invite you in. And so I really love that analogy. We actually, one of our customers, we wrote a blog post about his kind of strategy because he was getting a 67% reply rate. So we obviously want to know, okay, what are you doing to get that reply rate? Because it's amazing. So what he was doing is he was making sure in that first step emails that he was asking 1 to even 3 questions to his prospects. And the reason that he was doing that is because he said, they don't know me. They've never even seen my name before. He didn't feel comfortable going in on that initial email the first time they're hearing from this guy saying, hey, I have this solution for you. When are you available to talk about it? So what he would do is kind of what Josh was saying here with that context opener. He was saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, he works in PR, but I think just his strategy can be utilized in any industry or vertical. And so he was relating, saying, we work in the same industry. And then he was, the questions were about, like Josh said, any pain points that they may have. So maybe, what roadblocks are you running into? What hurdles are you facing? Or what's working really well for you even? And what he found is that people were more likely to respond to those questions because there's no pressure there. It's not a sales pitch. It just comes across as a genuine email, someone asking questions about their business. So like I said, he got a 67% reply rate on that initial campaign. And it worked really well for him. And it also, if you think about it, it kind of works as a mini discovery too, right? So you have these prospects who are answering the questions, and then you can kind of look at it and say, oh, maybe they are a good fit for us. Maybe they're not. So it's kind of twofold.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of trying to catch up on some questions here as well. Yeah, Yusuf, we will absolutely be able to link to the blog post. We actually just came out with a brand new blog post pertaining specifically to subject lines. So we will also kind of link that in the YouTube comments there, as well as the email recordings out to you all.
And just a heads up about the blog post that I mentioned. There's no actual templates in this blog post with the 67% reply rate, but there is a lot of really great information in terms of strategy in that case study. So it's a lot of really good information there.
Absolutely. Orland Davies says, will sending an attachment in the second or third email increase the spam chance of the thread? Again, if the first step has already been established in the sort of main chain, it's in their main inbox, there's a very, very, very low likelihood that it will land anywhere else. They've essentially already given you the okay. So you're essentially building trust the longer you stay in someone's inbox. Again, using the analogy of knocking on a stranger's door, they've let you in. You can now give them that pamphlet showing all the bullet points about what you can and cannot do. They've asked for it at this point. if you're just kind of knocking on the door, they open it, and then you have this big pamphlet just staring them in the face, chances are they're gonna tell you to go away. So it's all about that context. It's all about kind of treating your messages as you would an actual in-person conversation. So no, you do not need to worry about it, about sending an attachment later on. In fact, I would encourage it down the line as opposed to a step one. And then Bruce says, do you have a recommendation for delays between asking for a LinkedIn connection and the first cold email? Good question. Usually you want the proximity to be very close.
Yep.
It might seem a bit disingenuous if you send the LinkedIn request and then immediately send the email. That seems a little bit canned. Waiting a couple of hours or even just sending it the next day is probably best practice there.
Yeah. And I was going to say 1 to 2 days max.
Yeah.
Because sending that LinkedIn connection to someone, it creates almost name recognition. So they see that LinkedIn request from you, maybe they accept the LinkedIn request, and then maybe the next day they get an email from you. When they see your name in their inbox, they'll remember that name, or there's name recognition there. So probably increase the chances they will open your email. So yeah, I would say 1 to 2 days max.
Correct. So again, just very brief summary here. Context opener is key. You want to give them an idea of why you're reaching out. The more air of legitimacy, of realism that you can provide around this email, the higher chance that someone's going to actually engage with you. If not because that they're interested, because that they genuinely feel that you are a human being. Thanks but no thanks is infinitely better than not getting a response at all, because at least you can check that person off of your list, and you don't need to spend more time sending emails out to those people without getting any engagement, which can lead to a slow impact on deliverability scores. If you have a list of 1,000 people, and 600 of them have never even opened your email a single time, yet you keep continuing to send them messages, there are algorithms on the email provider side that will kind of key into this sort of pattern. And over time, this will kind of debilitate you, and you may end up into spam just because no one's engaging with you at all. Persistence is key in this kind of business, but you do want to keep that kind of a little bit of restraint and not harass people to the point of them manually spam listing you, or
Yes.
proverbially beating a dead horse. If they're not engaging with you, you probably shouldn't continue sending them emails. There is diminishing returns with that. So going on to the first follow-up here. Again, you want to continue with that conversational style. You want to build off of that context opener. Just wanted to circle back, provide a bit more detail. You are alluding to the fact that you sent them a message previously, and you are keeping things along the same train of thought. The next bit of advice here is provide further detail about how you can specifically address the issue that you brought up in the first step. By asking those questions that pertain to your expertise and about that particular pain point, you want to provide examples and specific use cases about how you're going to help. Anybody can say that they're really great at something, or you have the best whatever. There is no reason for anyone to believe you if you're not willing to go into details about it. And you do not necessarily need to wait for them to ask for those details. If you provide examples and use cases, you're not just tooting your own horn. You are establishing yourself as someone with experience and expertise in this area, and you're willing to provide key information about how they can start to address these issues. No one wants to work with amateurs or rookies. And even if you are a startup kind of just delving into the space for the first time, you still know what you want to do and how you can help people. So you can just say, without giving kind of exact details about which company you've helped, you can say, I recently worked with someone in this location and we did this, this, and this for them.
Yeah.
You're not naming any names, but you're still giving them concrete information about what you actually plan on doing.
Yeah. And if you do have a use case, and putting that in a follow-up email. So if you think about it, you have that first email where you have some context, there's a general introduction, and then maybe you send that first follow-up email. If you worked with a company where you were able to help them increase their productivity by 40%, that 40% increase in productivity, like just that little tidbit right there, that could be what catches your prospect's attention. So maybe they're kind of skimming the email and they say, oh, And that stands out, and that's what's going to prompt a reply or a meeting or whatever the case may be. So it's really, like Josh said, it's really highlighting your capabilities and instilling confidence in the prospects that you're sending the emails to. Even if you are, new to the field, for example, you can still instill confidence in the emails that you're sending.
Yeah, exactly. The number one thing that I would recommend everybody avoid is sending a very simple message like, hey, did you get my previous message? If you're still interested, let me know. If you ever get to the point where that's the only thing left you have to say, the campaign is over. You are essentially, especially for step 2, if you're already kind of defaulting to that kind of follow-up, you are putting all of the onus on your campaign's performance on the first step. The information that you provided in step 1 is the only information that they're going to get. And if they haven't responded to the first step, there's probably no further reason for them to respond to you. So your follow-ups act as new hooks, and you want to provide new value and information to increase the likelihood that there's something that you're mentioning or hitting on that they like, which leads us to our next step, which is, I call it the kind of FAQ step. Again, continuing with the context opener, you're messaging in the same thread. And what I mean with FAQ answers is, again, you know what you do well, and you've been on phone calls. So questions come up repeatedly, and you are probably answering them all the time. Get ahead of the curve. Start addressing those particular common pain points here. So usually that entails pricing or perceived bonuses. Again, you're establishing expertise and experience and legitimacy by bringing these points up before they're asked of you. And you're just setting yourself up as someone that other people want to work with. You've been here before. You know exactly what to say, and you're saving yourself and the potential client's time. You're hitting on these things that are probably going to be brought up on the phone calls, and if you're answering them here, in the best case scenario, the only thing left to talk about is, oh, everything sounds great. Where do I sign up, or how do we get this going? So talk about pricing. If you have a very kind of rigid structure, mention that here. If you're open to negotiation and like to do custom plans, mention that you're willing to negotiate. People will really key into that and lean into kind of ways that they can save money. And what I mean by perceived bonuses is things like this right now. We not only sell reply in and of itself, but we also lean into client success and our support team and just other features that we have that will kind of round out the overall experience for you. And while that particular case may not apply to everyone here, everyone can have something like this, just a bonus that may come with everyone's sort of subscription or package or whatever, but doesn't seem like it. It's just off to the side, but it's included. Think of it like you're at a grocery store. People will put those yellow price tags on just to make it look like it's on sale, but it's the same price. The idea of additional value is very appealing to everybody. So if you can tune into that kind of mentality, thumbs up. Stefanie, was there anything that you kind of want to add for this third step here? Anything that you like to do?
No, I'm pretty much on the same page as you when it comes to the third step email. So
beautiful. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, is there another one here? Get another chat.
I just checked. I didn't see any as of yet. There is one. Let me check. There's one here about LinkedIn steps. So maybe we can kind of get through step 4 and step 5 in terms of content, and then we can kind of touch back on that question about LinkedIn steps.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, step 4, speaking to the whole threaded approach, there is a point where it becomes a little bit too much. You want to keep the things that are most relevant to each other in that initial thread. So the story will essentially be, you've introduced yourself, you've provided a specific example of how you're going to assist, and then you've given them that kind of supplementary information about pricing and commonly asked questions. Those 3 will work together to create a much clearer picture of exactly how you're going to fit into their routine by the end of it, as opposed to any of the individual pieces. So you want to keep those messages together. For step 4, I like to do a little bit of a soft reset. You don't need to reintroduce yourself from the ground up. You're not knocking on the door again, but you are giving a little bit of a break between the initial thread, give them time to digest, and then bring up a potential different use case or example, because maybe you have a number of different things, different services or products that you can provide, or a number of different ways that you can help. By providing a separate example here, you're increasing the likelihood that you're hitting on something that the people that you're reaching out to need. Just because you're reaching out to one particular industry doesn't mean that everyone's problems are exactly the same. So by diversifying your solutions, you're increasing the pool of potential prospects. And again, this is also where I like to remind people about potential pricing and things like that. You don't need to harp too long on it, because they did very recently receive these messages, but giving them just subtle reminders here and there will go a long way in increasing your interactions. The main point is you want to provide another use case that is distinct from your first one. If you don't have one, maybe just use another example of somebody that you worked with in the same kind of space. But you want to try and differentiate things as much as possible, because repetition is the #1 sign of automation. And even though you and I both know that this is automated, you want to get to the point where it doesn't feel like that.
No one else needs to know.
Exactly. It's not a secret that, like, people know that automated emails are a thing. So it's not like they're going to be completely in the dark about this, but you want to just instill the confidence that you are in fact a real person. And again, leaning away from a too kind of formal tone and trying to strike that casual conversational style goes a long way. And then again, I've only added 5 steps here. Stefanie did mention early on that 6 is kind of our end point here between 4 and 6. You can have an additional message between these two. You would essentially want to kind of keep hitting different use cases, different examples. Again, just diversifying your approach. If you run out of new things to talk about, if you run out of new value to provide, that's a good indicator that you want to go into the breakup message. And I want this message for my personal sequences to be the most tonally unique and distinct of the bunch. The idea being here is that you're still following a rather traditional structure by providing this information in a certain flow, and you're talking about things that pertain to your and their business. This one is essentially going to be a breakup message. You can make this as personal and kind of casual as you'd like. And the point being is that you want it to sound very different from the rest of the messages. And this will act as a little bit of a wake-up call to get them to realize, oh, this guy's real. Maybe I should go back and check out those other messages. Maybe there's something that I missed. If you're just, again, harping on the same kind of notes, speaking in the same manner, it's not going to have the same impact. You really want to sound different. You want to sound genuine as possible. And again, short and sweet. You don't have to harp on for a whole page and a half about what your company did and how you came up. Just make it sound real, sound legit, how you would talk to a family member or a friend. And that is enough to usually get the kind of note across.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times when people think about creating a campaign, they think of a campaign and automatically think of very like kind of formal language. Like Josh mentioned, think about it as you're talking to a family member. I wouldn't say friend, because maybe that's a bit too casual, but just have a very personal tone to it. Don't make it extremely formal. And I think, like I said, I think that's kind of the roadblock that a lot of people have when they think about creating a campaign, so to speak. They just think, okay, it has to be formal, which it doesn't. It just needs to sound personal. I like to say you want your prospects to think that you sat there and you wrote that email just for them and kind of give them the nice warm fuzzies. And, I also love the idea of leaving the door open for future conversations, because, maybe if someone's not replying to an email that you're sending or a whole campaign, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested. Maybe now is not a good time for them. And so maybe 3 months down the road, maybe that's going to kind of be that sweet spot of when they're looking for new software or, whatever your offering is. So, leaving the door open for future communication, ensuring that they have your contact information is also really huge for the last email that you're sending out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. The closer you can get to making it sound like you sat down and wrote this email that morning for that specific person, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have anything to do with functionally, like as far as deliverability. It's just about people keying in to the tone of your voice. People have kind of an internal monologue, and they will be able to read or hear how this thing sounds. And if you read it out loud and it sounds like you're reading off of an ad, they're going to read it the same way. So you want to step away from that and just make it sound like we're having a conversation right here. We're talking, and that is enough. That will get you the results that you're looking for.
Yeah. And to your point, Josh, too, if you kind of look at, the likelihood that an email will get replied to, if you look at reading level, this is one of my favorite ones. It's not the highest one on that list, but it's one of my favorite ones because, what you want to do as well, kind of going back to a personal tone, is you want to avoid using technical jargon as well. The more technical language you use, the more it's going to come across as some sort of automation. So it takes away from the personalization. So using really simple language, again, is really going to help with those replies coming in.
That's actually a good point before I hop into Scott and Bruce's questions here. In general, you want your reading level to be on the lower end of the spectrum, just because that allows you to hit more people will understand you. If you are going the super targeted route, which again does provide better results overall, if your kind of industry or niche, your goal is to hit very kind of tech savvy individuals, you want to speak on a level that kind of a consistent equal level. You want to say things that they will understand, and sometimes using that technical jargon will allow them to clue into, again, your expertise in that industry. So don't just belittle yourself because you think that it's a good idea generally. If you're speaking to IT specialists, don't be afraid to use that kind of jargon because they should know what you're referring to. But again, that does refer specifically if you're super targeted and you know that they will understand what you're talking about. This is usually applicable for people in the tech spaces or medical professions, things like that. Whereas if you're just doing sort of a general service, keep it on the lower end of that reading level. Bruce, do you provide a link to content in this initial sequence? If so, which step would you suggest? The answer is yes, we do. And that would be kind of in with the FAQs and the use cases. So you don't need to purely rely on anecdotal evidence, just writing a paragraph about an example of someone that you work with. You can give maybe 1 or 2 sentences just kind of briefly touching on it, and then point them towards a link that you want them to engage with. That is perfectly fine, again, as long as it's in step 2 or beyond. You don't want to add all that stuff in your first step.
Yeah, I think adding it, in that first step email, you want to have an introduction, you want to give a bit of context, you want to ask a couple of questions. I think that putting a link with even more information in that initial kind of introductory email, it might seem a bit like information overload for that first step email, which you also want to keep short and concise at the same time. So I'm definitely with you, Josh, second or third email for the links.
Yeah, and it's also about, so in each of these steps, I have at the bottom a clear call to action. The most typical example of that would probably be, do you want to hop on a phone call? It doesn't necessarily need to be the phone call if that's not your true goal. If you just want people like heading towards your site and things like that, or engaging with a YouTube link or something like that, those also qualify as call to actions as long as you are gauging your success based on those different metrics. To that same point, you don't want to just overload your messages with a number of different links, especially in the same step, because you're then diluting that call to action. If I have 3 different links in my one step, there's no way that in a normal situation that they're going to be clicking on all 3. People have only a minimal attention span when it comes to this kind of these external content, these messages from people that they don't know. So you want to focus their attention, focus that limited span on exactly what you want them to do. So if you want them to book a call with you, you want to guide them directly to your calendar link. If you want them to click on your YouTube channel, you want to guide them directly to that. Don't dilute your call to action by including multiple points. Whichever one you think is most valuable and they will get the most traction out of, point their attention to that specific one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Josh. I mean, if you think about an email, if I'm getting an email that has 4 links in that email, odds are I might click on one and get redirected. I'm probably not going to go back into that email and click on all the remaining links in that email. I'm probably also not going to reply to that email because I'm assuming that the person who's sending me that email just wants me to have access to that content. So if you are using hyperlinks in the email, but you're not specifically asking for that reply, then you can't really look at your campaigns and say, well, why is my reply rate, 1%? Well, you're not really asking for that reply in the content that you're sending. You're just kind of sending them a whole bunch of hyperlinks. And again, having multiple links in your emails, again, it's probably a sure giveaway that there is some sort of automation going on there.
Yeah, exactly. Again, just you want it to be as focused as possible. Scott Campbell says, along with that subject, what is your experience of those using Reply.io, starting with LinkedIn steps? Example, step 1, viewing their LinkedIn profile. Step 2, connecting with them. Almost hands down, it is better for engagement. By having and utilizing a multifaceted approach, you're just increasing the likelihood that you are hitting them on a platform that they like. I work for Reply.io. We are a mass email company, but not everyone out there is going to spend as much time on their email accounts as you or I. So diversifying your outreach and hitting them on LinkedIn, maybe even a Facebook, whatever you think that's going to capture their attention, is just increasing your chances of hitting them in a place that they're most comfortable with. Some people just don't like writing emails. Maybe you're reaching out to an industry that isn't very tech savvy, and they just spend a lot of time maybe outdoors. Chances are, if you're emailing them in the middle of the day, they're off doing something else. They're not going to get it until later at night, and then they're going to be tired, and they're not going to want to respond to you. Maybe hitting them on a LinkedIn is much more easier for their time management, and it's going to provide more results. So yes, unanimously, the more multi-channel aspects you can include into your sequences, the better off you're going to be overall, hands down. If you can afford the time, absolutely do it. Was there another question here?
There are 2 questions, and maybe we'll just touch on this one because it is related to LinkedIn. Any insight into the order? LinkedIn first, then email, or email, LinkedIn, email? For me personally, I think having some sort of LinkedIn step before you start emails in the campaign, I think that is the preferable way to go. Like I said, there's that name recognition there. And it's happened to me so many times. I get a LinkedIn request or something that I'm seeing on LinkedIn. And then, maybe later on that day or the next day, I get an email. I recognize that name right away. I always open those emails. So I would say start with some sort of LinkedIn. Like I said, whether it's a viewing at the profile or a LinkedIn connection, and then start with the emails.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just on a call with a client before we started this stream, and they had the same question, but it was pertaining to calls. If you start off with a phone call, it has very much the same effect as LinkedIn, though I do think LinkedIn is a little bit more effective just in today's day and age. I know personally that if I don't immediately recognize the phone number, I'm probably not going to pick up the phone. But even leaving that voicemail, and as long as it sounds genuine, will increase your rates overall. If you were to send an email first and then the voicemail, it's kind of a little bit a case of too little too late. You've already started the outreach and you've given them the opportunity to recognize you as automated. And maybe they just are kind of down on emails in general and they immediately hit the spam button. At that point, your phone call is falling on deaf ears and you've already been marked as spam. So it's kind of pointless. So doing it at the beginning of the campaign typically just keeps you safe all the way through. And again, provides a boost to engagement for your step 1.
So there is another question here about integration with Google Sheets. So we will get to that. We'll definitely get to that question before we hop off. I think we have 7 minutes left. So one of the things that I really wanted to mention before we kind of wrap up is remember to constantly revisit your content and make changes as you go. A couple of reasons. So Josh and I have both been at Reply for 5 years,
All our
which is
lives.
which is kind of crazy to me because it doesn't feel like 5 years. But
Yeah.
and what was working 5 years ago when Josh and I first came on board, there was this kind of try, test, and true method in terms of content. It doesn't necessarily work now. Maybe it didn't even work 3 years later because more and more people are using email as a communication channel. And so what happens is there's a method that works, everyone catches on to it, and slowly all cold emails look exactly the same. So I can pick out a cold email from a mile away. Maybe it's because we've been here for 5 years. We know what to look for, but it all becomes very similar looking. So, even if you do have a campaign that is performing really well, change it up sometimes, create a new campaign where you're changing up some of that content. And it's also a good idea to change up that content from a deliverability perspective, which I think we touched on in our last session as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The longer you kind of rely on the exact same messaging, especially if you're running the exact same messaging for multiple members on a team, that really expedites the natural decay of your domain. And it's not going to happen overnight. You're still going to get some legs out of your messages, but you can really stretch out the lifespan of a single domain for years and years if you're doing it properly, if you're constantly switching things up, because there are algorithms out there. Sorry. Voice cracked. There are algorithms out there that are looking for patterns, and the more kind of samey your sequences are, the more likely that you're going to end up getting flagged by one of those. So again, diversification is key. Switching things up regularly every couple of months is definitely going to help you out.
Yeah, because you don't want to kind of your emails to start to sound like every other cold email from every other kind of SDR salesperson that's going out there, because you're not going to stand out. It's eventually just going to kind of seem like the same thing to all your prospects. So you want to kind of be able to differentiate yourself from all the other emails you get or your prospects are getting and just kind of stand out in their inbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this will be the final thing that I talk about on as far as content. And then I want to just hit on the scheduling aspect a little bit. But if you would respond to the message that you've written, chances are someone else will. Just leaning back to the thing that I said early on in the call, we get these automated messages all the time. And just because we're getting them and they look a certain way or they fit a similar style, if you're not responding to those messages, there's no reason for you to emulate that style because it didn't work. So don't be afraid to try different things, to step outside of any sort of traditional style or structure. If you believe that you would respond to the message, chances are other people will as well.
Okay, so I think we have time for 2 more questions. So let's get to those before we wrap up. So the first question, are you planning on adding Google Sheets integration with Reply? This is not something that I've heard about from our team as with our roadmap. We are focusing on improving our current integrations with our CRMs. However, you can connect Google Sheets with Reply via Zapier. So it is a paid service. However, that's something that we do on our team as well. We've integrated our Google Sheets via API with our Reply account. So that is something that you can do via Zapier. And the last question is from Scott. Scott had to jump off, but he says, what's the best practice for when you don't have the right email address for a person? So it was validated as invalid or it's bounced. Is it good to keep trying other email addresses for that person within a sequence? The problem is that it takes a good deal of time.
He goes on to kind of mention LinkedIn Sales Nav as a potential outlet for reaching out to those people if you don't have their email addresses. And I would agree with that. Hitting them on another platform and just trying to establish that you've tried to hit them in other places tends to work pretty well. I would not recommend continuing to randomly type in alterations on their email address. No. Bounces. So emailing someone and not getting a response will impact deliverability over a very long period of time. It's essentially negligible if it's a one-off here and there. if you're getting bounces and you continue to get bounces, especially to the same kind of domains, that is a little bit more impactful than just not getting a response. So if you're not sure that the email address is legitimate, I would avoid trying to continue sending emails to that person, because it can have bigger repercussions for your domain than if you were to just leave it alone.
Yeah. And, we probably don't have time to get into this today because we only have a couple of minutes left. But just very quickly, one thing to keep in mind, especially with your prospects, is making sure that those emails that you are using are valid emails. So whether you validate them within Reply or on a platform outside of Reply, making sure they are valid before you send them out. Like Josh said, we really don't recommend kind of guessing. So maybe putting in, their name and then their domain and kind of crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that bounce so many times. I've seen people try to do that and it doesn't turn out well. Your bounce rates will go up quite fast. So definitely stay away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we're probably going to have to do another call to dive more deeply into this. But essentially, the point that I was going to make was, you want to send your emails earlier on in the day as opposed to after work hours. The idea being, you want to be the first thing that they see when they come into work. By messaging them, maybe, so for example, after 6 local time, chances are they're off work, they're done. They're not going to want to answer emails. They're not going to want to check their emails. They want to avoid work as much as possible. It's human nature. During that time, other emails could be piling on top of yours. So by the time they do get back into work, they're checking their messages. You are now at the bottom of the list and the last thing that they're going to get to. So you have a much higher chance of getting engagement if you're the first thing that they see rather than the last. So I typically try to keep my sequences before lunch, just because the later on in the workday, people tend to kind of tune out. So if you can get them early on, they've had their coffee, they're in the swing of things, getting as much as done as they can early on before they can kind of start to check out. That's your peak performance hours. So anything before kind of 1 or 2 p.m. Local time tends to work.
The last thing that you want is for an email to land in someone's inbox at 4:55 p.m. They may check the email. They probably won't reply to that email before they either shut their laptop down for the day or, in pre-COVID, leave the office. So odds are by the next day, they've probably forgotten about that email, even if they opened it. So I like to personally just kind of round out my campaigns usually by early afternoon as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's not any sort of, it's not a knock on your content or anything like that, but people are busy. People have lives. So if they are checking it after hours and they don't want to get to it until the next morning, there's a very high likelihood that they'll kind of forget about it. And because it's marked as read, they may just gloss over it when it comes time to get back to you. So yeah, try to be the first thing that they see. Keep it to early mornings and it'll work out.
Yeah. So again, we ran over our hour.
Yeah.
Josh and I tend to do this. So thank you guys for joining. It looks like we've answered all the questions that were either in the Q&A or in the chat. So again, thank you guys for coming. This will be available on our YouTube channel, so reply.io's YouTube channel, but also you should get a recording of this session sent to you via email from Zoom. Like we said, we are going to be doing sessions every couple of weeks. So if there's anything specific that you want us to touch on, we're more than happy to hear your recommendations, questions, feedback, anything that you have. Just shoot us a quick message.
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you. We hope to see you all in a couple more weeks. And yeah, stay safe out there. Talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Yes.